From Season 2 started off as a very wild ride, and Martin's introduction was a huge reason why that first episode was so exciting. Martin was the old man who Boyd found in the dungeon, the same guy who ended up infecting Boyd with the worms, the same worms that Boyd had to use to kill Smiley. So Martin definitely had one of the strongest introductions and impact out of any other character in the entire series. There were so many different questions that he made me ask, like who put him there? Did the monsters do this to him? Are there other people in Fromland who chained him up? Why did they chain him up? Why didn't they just kill him? And on and on and on. There's so many different questions you can ask about Martin's situation. But as the story of Season 2 progressed, it made me ask another question. Was Martin even real to begin with? Or was he a dream conjured by the music box? More than likely in order to get the worms and the music box itself into the town. And even if he was real, was he human or just an entity pretending to be human? Let's take a look at the evidence and try to understand what the truth about Martin actually is. Because depending on what he really is, it can mean so many different things for the story of Fromland. Starting off, we have to go back to when the old man asked Boyd, what if Abby was right? What if it's all just a dream? And this was such a crazy thing to hear from Martin because he was never in the town, at least not after Boyd got there. So how exactly would he have known about Abby? And even crazier, how would he know that Abby thought that Fromland was a dream? Oh man, this guy is so incredibly mysterious, and him knowing about this definitely made it seem like Martin actually had mental powers. Of course, those being mind reading and telekinesis. Reading minds would explain how he was able to know about Abby and her thinking Fromland is a dream, and throwing the rope could easily be explained by telekinesis. It also explains how he could overpower Boyd in such a malnourished state, which when you think about it doesn't really make any sense. I mean, look at this guy, and yet he overpowered Boyd. So there's definitely something very freaky going on with Martin one way or another. But all of that was before we really learned about the music box and of course the worms. In order to really explain why Martin being an entity or possibly even the jellyfish himself is such a strong possibility, we have to take a look at the final episode of Season 2. In this episode, Sarah tells Boyd and Kenny that there's an entity, seemingly the same one that's in control of the music box, that is laughing at Boyd for setting it free. But even more importantly, Sarah says that this entity really wants to hurt us, presumably humans. And considering the fact that the music box was right here at this moment, but in the dungeon dimension, it definitely starts to imply that Martin was just an illusion, possibly a dream made by the music box itself for the purpose of infecting someone so that it could be taken back to the town and therefore fulfill its twisted desires to torture humans. It's kind of interesting to remember that after getting the worms from the old man, Boyd was the only person who saw the music box, and it wasn't until after Boyd killed Smiley that other people started seeing the music box as well. Elgin and Marielle were the first ones to see it, but both of those happened after Boyd already killed Smiley, and both of them were also in the hospital when Boyd killed Smiley. So Boyd came into contact with them immediately after killing Smiley. I don't know if it's important, but I just thought I should mention it. And that makes it seem like the reason why the ballerina instructed Boyd to feed Smiley the worms was so that the music box could be sort of freed from Boyd. It's kind of interesting because it's almost like by using the worms to do that, Boyd gave the music box permission to infect other people. It could be that those rules work the same way the talisman does, where it's not allowed to hurt other people apart from who has the worms until that ritual is completed, or in other words, until it's invited into the town. The connection between the worms and the music box is very tricky to really understand. At first, I thought that you only see the music box if you have the worms, but I remembered that Boyd was seeing them before he got infected. But it could just be that the dungeon rules are different than the actual Fromland. Either that, or the worms and the music box are just two different monsters, two different entities. Though it doesn't seem a coincidence that the music box was only capable of infecting everyone after the cicadas were already born. While they were only worms, the music box didn't seem to have the ability to do that because only Boyd was seeing it at that point. Martin's knowledge of Abby and the fact that she thought Fromland was a dream implies a connection between Martin and the voices that Sarah is sometimes hearing. Those voices are the only things in Fromland that have the ability to see what everyone is doing and listen to what everyone is saying. And as far as we know, whoever has this power is pretty much omniscient and can even see inside houses. So Martin having this knowledge might be an indicator that he's the big bad of the show and might really be the creator of Fromland itself. I've always found the ideas that the worms didn't exist until this very moment very interesting. Up until Martin starts visibly struggling, all that he was doing was constantly trying to get Boyd to leave the dungeon or kill him. And if Martin was an entity or the entity himself, it'd make sense for him to try to scare Boyd into leaving the dungeon. That might be why he kept talking about worse things being in the forest, tip of the spear, etc, etc, because he was trying to get Boyd to stop looking for answers and go back to the town. The demands for Boyd to kill him to end his misery could have been part of a ploy to try to break Boyd's character. And of the season 3 teaser, we know Fromland is actively trying to do that, actively trying to break Boyd. And when none of that works, we see Martin struggling, and it's only afterwards that we actually see the worms. And this is where he completely switches up and attacks Boyd, infecting him with the worms. If the entity created the worms at this very moment, I think that would make a lot of sense, because it would also explain why the monsters clearly had never seen anything like that before Smiley was killed. The way Martin speaks in a lot of his scenes is very shifty, like someone who isn't sure of the answer, almost like the entities trying not to mess up the deception by saying something that would be really outrageous to Boyd. But if Martin is real, that can easily be explained by the fact that he was tortured for almost 200 years, and obviously you'd lose a lot of your mind in that scenario. Anybody would. But because he seemed genuinely concerned when he kept trying to get Boyd to leave the dungeon and prevent him from getting infected. His switch up can easily be explained by him getting possessed by the worms or the music box or something like that, because before he switches up, Martin doesn't know anything about Boyd. It was only afterwards that he mentioned Abby. If he was really getting possessed, then that makes perfect sense, because whatever possessed him might have been the same voices that talked to Sarah. Therefore, it would obviously know what Abby said, just like it knew about Father Catry burying the bag or Tabitha digging the basement. But because Boyd never gets possessed by the music box or the worms, it doesn't seem like either of them has the ability to do that. Martin being a dream all along is another one that I've heard before, and basically it's the idea that Martin was never real to begin with, neither an entity nor a human, and that the entire interaction was just a dream made by the music box. This is an interesting idea because it basically means that the worms was something Boyd dragged out of the dream, in the same way that Kenny's wound from the cicadas or the chick who got blown out by the music box both dragged their injuries from the dreams into the real world, or into the world of Fromland to be more accurate. This also explains why the monsters didn't know about the worms, because Boyd came with them from the music box dream. This also explains why the monsters didn't know about the worms, because Boyd came with them from the music box dream. And an interesting scenario to think about is if Martin was real and a human being, it would mean that his real body was existing somewhere in Fromland while seemingly his soul was in the dungeon dimension. We saw that Julie, Marielle, Randall's bodies still existed in Fromland even though Boyd was seeing them in the dungeon. That means if Martin was human, his real body was somewhere else. It's also very creepy to think about, because what would have happened if Boyd dragged Julie, Marielle, or Randall's bodies back to the real world? What would happen to their real body? Or would there be two versions of them existing at the same time? It's just crazy to think about that. Like, what's going on with the dungeon? Is it another dimension, or I don't even know, parallel universe, alternate dimension, their souls? What is it? What even is the dungeon? You know, it's just crazy to think about. But there's something else, and maybe it means nothing. Randall was outside after getting infected by the cicadas, and the monsters never attacked him, even though they saw where he went, and he was just laying on the ground like an idiot. So maybe in a future season, Boyd might find Martin's body, and the monsters just left him alone for hundreds of years while his soul or whatever was in the dungeon. That's crazy to think about, but it seems that the monsters are afraid of the music box, because when it showed up in the RV, they completely stopped moving towards it and they just watched. Maybe they recognized this entity as the one responsible for killing Smiley, or maybe the music box entity is the same one that made them. But before this happens, there was also a very interesting scene with something banging underneath the RV. Maybe whatever it was banging from the underground caves. Could be. In the beginning of all of this, Boyd saw a version of Alice that I think was there to keep him from climbing the rope. Whether it's meant to help him or trap him, that's very hard to say, but we definitely need to remember that that actually happened. Boyd did see something in this moment, and whether it's relevant or not, who knows, but it's worth keeping in mind. Martin eventually asks Boyd whether or not that's a gun that he was holding, and that line was a huge reason why people started saying that the faraway trees have the ability to teleport someone backwards in time. And especially when you think about the dates written in the bottles, this theory definitely makes a lot of sense, because it would mean that somebody was going back and marking important dates using the bottles for some reason, which we don't know about. Obviously we don't know about. And there was actually a very interesting scene, and I don't really see people talking about it, but when the dogs were shown for the first time and Victor and Ethan were in the woods and Jim and Tabitha came to find Ethan, there was a very interesting thing happening while Victor was standing next to the faraway tree. He started hearing the same sounds that were happening when he was a kid after the massacre. So I don't know if that's implying that somebody time traveled from the massacre to their present time or something like that, because it was almost like he was hearing the sounds coming through the faraway tree itself. I just think this scene was really interesting, and it definitely adds into the idea that faraway trees can be used to time travel, because he was hearing the sounds that he remembered happening during the massacre. So that's an interesting thing to think about, and this was also the only time in the series where we saw both the dogs at the same time. So it could have been that it's always been one dog, but it was time traveling from the massacre, or it was going to time travel to the massacre. So that's it's just interesting to think about that scene.
No. Don't you hear that?
No.
We gotta go.
And if you think that the faraway trees do have the ability to do that, Martin asking whether or not that's a gun would make perfect sense if he's from the past. Because obviously if he's from the past and Boyd traveled back in time, he's probably never seen a gun that looked like modern pistols at any point in his life. Martin has a US Marine Corps tattoo. That's how Boyd knew that he was a Marine. People have said that this tattoo Martin wears stopped being used by the Marines in the 1860s. So considering that Jade also saw a Civil War soldier in one of his visions, things, whatever, you know, like it's so hard to describe them, but you know what I mean. Boyd traveling back in time or Martin being from that era wouldn't be very surprising, because it seems that people were coming into Fromland even back then. And one thing I want to say is it's very dumb that Boyd never asked Victor if he knew somebody named Martin. Like, Come on, Boyd. Victor is the oldest resident in the town. You meet a random guy in the woods, chained up in some dungeon, basement, whatever you want to call it, and you never think to ask Victor if he's ever met that guy? You gotta be kidding me. Like, how dumb can these people get? Holy shit. But there's actually an even crazier moment, and this is actually one of the biggest questions related to him, and that is, how did he throw the rope down the well? There was no answer for this question, and let me just say right now that it is impossible for a human being to be able to throw this rope into that well from this position. It doesn't matter what you say, because I can use my brain and I can use it very well. Unlike the people in this town, I was born with something called common sense, and that common sense tells me and shows me very clearly that the human leg doesn't reach that far. It doesn't matter what you say, it is impossible because of something called physics and of course biology. Even if the rope was right next to Martin's legs, it isn't possible for a human being to kick that rope with enough force from that angle and from the way he's chained up with enough force that it falls into the well the way that rope fell into the well. It is not possible, especially when you think about Martin's condition and the fact that he's been so malnourished for however many years he's been chained up. It doesn't matter, but it just isn't possible. There's so many different reasons why it's not possible for him to have done that. I just wanted to clear this up. It is not possible for a normal human being to do that. So right off the bat, we already got some indicators that Martin is not what he appears to be, one way or another. Whether it's telekinesis or reality manipulation or him somehow creating dreams, I don't know, but there's something very mysterious that happened in that moment. And it's also kind of interesting that the rope did not appear until Boyd said that he had no way to get out of the well. It's almost like he hadn't thought of the story that far ahead just yet, and he had to make the rope to throw it down the well. But okay. Anyways, it's crazy to me how impactful Martin and Elgin's introduction are to the series, because Elgin clearly had knowledge about Fromland somehow. Whether it's because he was here previously or he knew that he would come in the future because of a dream or something else, doesn't even matter. Just by knowing about Fromland as he was coming in automatically makes him someone important to me. And that's because of the questions that he makes you ask. How did he know about Fromland? If he has been here before, then how did he leave? But of course, we know that he definitely did not fulfill the expectations, because all that he ended up doing was telling us something we already knew about, that being the nursery rhyme, which we still haven't gotten an explanation for, but okay, maybe in the future Elgin will actually tell us something new. Martin, on the other hand, I think he's made a huge impact on the narrative. Whether he's real or an illusion, he's still definitely one of my favorite characters, and that's crazy to think about because he only appeared in 2 episodes. Up to now, Martin remains one of the best and most mysterious characters in the entire series. The amount of discussions that can be had about him or because of him are truly endless. This guy is just incredible. I really want to see an explanation for him and where he came from. I just want to know about him. I really want to see his backstory. Whether he's real or a secret entity, learning whatever the truth is about Martin would definitely be a top 3 moment in the series for me. And you tell me, what do you think about Martin? Was he an illusion? Was he a dream? Was he a secret entity, demon disguised? Or was he just a real human who lived for almost 200 years, as seemingly because of the worms? Or is there something else going on with him? Like, you tell me what you think. What do you think about Martin?